I was starving. Not the kind of starving where you skip a meal and feel a little lightheaded, but the deep, gnawing hunger that makes your thoughts sluggish and your stomach twist into knots. The kind where every movement feels heavier than it should, and you start imagining the taste of things you haven't eaten in months. Rations on my freighter had run out 2 days ago, and I'd been stretching what little emergency supplies I had left. The protein paste from the survival kit was an option, but if you've ever tasted protein paste, you'd understand why I wasn't rushing to crack it open. I kept telling myself I'd hold out just a little longer, as if some miracle would appear in the wreckage of this godforsaken planet. Then I remembered the chocolate bar. It was old, slightly melted from the fluctuating temperatures, but it was chocolate. Real, rich, sweet chocolate. A reminder of home. I'd been saving it, treating it like some sacred relic. But hunger had a way of making you reconsider your priorities. I pulled it out, unwrapping the foil slowly, savoring the sight of it. That's when I saw her. At first I thought she was just another piece of wreckage, something broken and forgotten. But then she moved. Just the slightest shift, a slow curling of her fingers, a flicker of breath against the dust. She was curled up in the shadow of a downed transport, barely visible in the dim light. Her skin had an eerie, iridescent shimmer, shifting between deep blue and faint purple as she breathed. An alien. She was thin, too thin. Even under the tattered fabric wrapped around her, I could see the sharp angles of her bones, the way her limbs trembled with weakness. Her face was humanoid enough, but her eyes were too large, her features too delicate. She looked young, though I had no way of knowing if that meant anything for her species. She was staring at me, or more accurately, at the chocolate bar in my hand. Something inside me twisted. I had no idea who she was, what she was doing here, or if she was even friendly, but none of that mattered in that moment, because I knew what hunger looked like. I crouched down, careful not to startle her, and broke the chocolate bar in half. It wasn't much, but it was something. She flinched at first, as if expecting a trick, her gaze darting between my face and my outstretched hand. The way she hesitated, the way she seemed to brace herself. It made me wonder what kind of life she had lived before this moment. Then, slowly, she reached out. Her fingers brushed against mine as she took the chocolate, and for the first time, she really looked at me. She didn't speak, not yet, but when she took that first bite, something changed. Her eyes widened, and a low, vibrating hum, almost like a purr, escaped her throat. And then, for the first time since I'd crashed here, she smiled. The moment the chocolate touched her lips, everything about her changed. Her expression, tense and wary just seconds ago, softened into something almost childlike. Her large, luminescent eyes widened, and a faint shudder ran through her delicate frame. She chewed slowly, as if trying to parse the taste, and then something strange happened. She made a sound. A low, vibrating hum, almost like a purr. It was soft at first, just a subtle vibration in her throat, but as she swallowed, it deepened, filling the still air around us. I had no idea what it meant, but I had a feeling it was a good sign. "Guess you've never had chocolate before," I said, watching as she licked the last traces of melted sweetness from her fingertips. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at me, her gaze shifting between my face and the half-eaten chocolate bar in my hand. Then, as if realizing she had been silent too long, she swallowed hard and spoke. "You shared." Her voice was quiet, soft, accented in a way I couldn't place. Her lips formed the words carefully, like she wasn't used to speaking them. "Your last food." I blinked, surprised she knew my language at all. I had no idea how long she'd been here, but she had clearly picked up something. "Yeah, well," I shrugged, suddenly feeling self-conscious. "Couldn't let you starve." She kept staring as if those words didn't make sense to her, as if the idea of someone giving away their last bit of food was completely foreign. It made me wonder, what kind of life had she lived before this? Was kindness something rare in her world? After a long moment, she pressed a hand to her chest. Her fingers, long and slightly clawed at the tips, curled against her own skin as she spoke a name. It was a fluid, melodic string of syllables, something far too complex for me to repeat. I frowned. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to say that. I'll just call you Blue. She blinked, her head tilting slightly. Then, to my surprise, she smiled again, smaller this time but no less genuine. Blue? She repeated, as if testing the word. I nodded. That works. We sat there for a while, the silence stretching between us. I could feel her studying me, analyzing me with those large, intelligent eyes. The way she looked at me was different now, like she was reassessing something, trying to understand why I had done what I did. Then, without a word, she broke off a small piece of her chocolate and held it out to me. I stared at her, a little stunned. She was returning the gesture. I didn't need the food, I still had my half. But something about the action made my chest tighten. I took the piece, popping it into my mouth with a nod of thanks. For the first time since I'd crashed here, I didn't feel so alone. I thought I was saving her. That night, after we had both eaten our tiny portions of chocolate, Blue stayed close. Not too close, there was still a cautious distance between us, but close enough that I could tell she no longer saw me as a threat. It was strange. Just hours ago, I had assumed I was alone on this barren planet, a nameless wreck among the twisted metal remains of my freighter. But now, I wasn't alone. She watched everything I did, the way I adjusted the makeshift fire, how I checked the emergency transponder on my wrist, useless since I already knew it wasn't transmitting beyond the atmosphere, and even the way I stretched out my sore muscles. Occasionally, she would tilt her head, as if committing each motion to memory. At some point, I had to ask, "How long have you been here?" She hesitated, her large, luminescent eyes flicking to the sky before answering, "Too long." That wasn't much to go on, but from the way her voice dropped, I could tell she didn't want to talk about it. Maybe she'd crashed here just like I had, maybe she had been abandoned. Either way, I figured pressing her for details wouldn't do either of us any good. Still, something about her didn't sit right with me. She looked fragile, weak, as if she had barely been surviving before I found her. But at the same time, there was something off about that idea. She wasn't helpless. Even in her weakened state, there was an alertness to her. She didn't just react to sounds. She anticipated them. When a distant rumble echoed across the desolate landscape, she stiffened before I even registered it. I followed her gaze to the horizon, my body tensing. Something was coming. I barely had time to push myself to my feet before the sky above us roared. It wasn't thunder. It was something worse. Ships. Big ones. They broke through the cloud cover like hunting birds, sleek and sharp-edged, their dark hulls glinting under the weak light. Symbols I didn't recognize ran along their sides in glowing, pulsing script. Not human. I grabbed Blue's arm without thinking. "We have to go." But she didn't move. Instead, she just stood there, staring up at the ships with something that wasn't fear. Not relief either. It was something else entirely. Something that made my stomach twist. The ground shook as the ships descended. Figures emerged from their undersides, tall, armored, moving with eerie precision. They carried weapons that hummed with energy, their glowing visors locked onto us. I knew with absolute certainty that I was about to die. Then Blue stepped forward. She raised her hand, fingers curling in a deliberate motion. And just like that, the armed figures knelt. I felt my breath catch. I had thought I was saving her. I had no idea who she really was. I barely had time to process what I was seeing. One second, I thought we were both dead. The next, the armed figures in dark armor, her people, were kneeling before her like she was something holy. I took a slow step back, my pulse hammering. I wasn't sure what was more terrifying, the fact that they had arrived so suddenly, or the fact that Blue, the starving, frail girl I had just shared my last chocolate bar with, was looking at them with quiet authority. The closest soldier, a towering figure clad in sleek black armor, lowered his weapon and placed a fist against his chest. When he spoke, his voice was deep and filled with reverence. The language was unfamiliar, full of smooth, rolling tones that I couldn't hope to decipher, but Blue understood. She turned to me, and for the first time I saw her for what she really was. She had looked fragile before, but now, standing tall with her people kneeling at her feet, she radiated something entirely different. Power, control, royalty. I opened my mouth, then closed it. My brain scrambled for an explanation, but none of them made sense. Blue? Her gaze shifted back to me, and for the briefest moment, the confident mask faltered. Just a flicker of hesitation, as if she wasn't sure how I would react. Then she squared her shoulders and spoke. I am not who you believed me to be. No kidding. I swallowed hard, looking at the armed soldiers, then back at her. So? What? You're some kind of leader? She hesitated, then nodded. I was lost, separated from my people. She glanced toward the kneeling soldiers, her voice quieter now. They found me. I let out a slow breath, trying to process everything. And what does that make me? The soldiers still hadn't moved. They were waiting. For her. For orders. That sent a new kind of unease twisting through my gut. Blue's expression softened. You shared your last food, she said. With me? I frowned. Her eyes darkened, not in anger, but in something heavier, something I didn't understand yet. To my people, such an act is unheard of. She took a slow step toward me, her voice careful, deliberate. You did not know who I was. You had nothing, and yet you shared. I could feel the weight of the soldiers' gazes on me now. I wasn't sure what they saw. An outsider, an anomaly, a threat? Blue turned to them and spoke in their language. Her words were sharp, decisive. The soldiers reacted immediately, lowering their weapons. A ripple of tension eased from the air. I exhaled, my hands still clenched into fists. Are they going to kill me? Blue looked back at me, and for the first time since the ships had arrived, she smiled. No, she said. You are to be honored. That didn't make me feel any better. That word sat uneasily in my chest as the soldiers rose to their feet. They moved in eerie synchronization, their weapons no longer trained on me but still present, a quiet reminder of the power they held. I wasn't sure what Blue had told them, but whatever it was had changed everything. One of the soldiers stepped forward. His armor was different from the others, marked with intricate silver patterns that shimmered under the weak light. He placed a fist over his heart and bowed slightly. To me. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. A few hours ago, I was a stranded nobody scraping the bottom of my emergency rations. Now, alien warriors were bowing to me like I was someone important. I glanced at Blue. She was watching me, her expression unreadable. What did you tell them? I asked, my voice low. She tilted her head slightly, as if searching for the right words. That you are worthy. Worthy of what? That was the question that sent ice crawling down my spine. Another soldier approached, holding something in his hands, a deep blue fabric embroidered with the same glowing script that marked their ships. He extended it toward me with the same reverence one might offer a king's robe. I didn't take it right away. "What is this?" "A gift," Blue said simply. "A recognition." I hesitated, then slowly reached for the fabric. It was surprisingly heavy, the material smooth but lined with something metallic. Some kind of ceremonial garment? A banner? I had no idea. As soon as I touched it, the surrounding soldiers tapped their fists to their chests in unison. A rhythmic sound, firm and deliberate. I wasn't used to this kind of attention. I wasn't used to being seen as anything other than a survivor, a drifter, a guy just trying to make it to the next day. But these people, Blue's people, looked at me like I had done something incredible. All because I had shared my food. Blue stepped closer, her voice softer now. "You do not understand what you have done." "Obviously," I muttered. She smiled, but there was something sad about it. "To my people, survival is war. Every resource, every scrap of food is earned through battle or blood. No one gives without expecting something in return." She gestured to the cloth in my hands. "But you did." I shifted uncomfortably. You were starving. It wasn't a big deal." "To you." Her gaze was steady, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "But to us, it was everything." I swallowed hard. The weight of their stares, the kneeling, the gift, it all made sense now. They weren't honoring me for a grand act of heroism. They were honoring me because, by their culture's standards, what I had done was impossible. I wasn't sure whether that was humbling or terrifying. Maybe both. The moment I took the cloth, I knew something had changed. The way the soldiers watched me, the way Blue stood just a little straighter, it was like I had crossed some invisible threshold. I wasn't just some stranded human anymore. To them, I was something else. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing. One of the soldiers, the one with the silver markings on his armor, stepped closer and spoke in their language. His voice was deep, authoritative. I had no idea what he was saying, but from the way his gaze flicked to Blue, I could tell he was waiting for her approval. She nodded once. Whatever he had asked, it was enough to send the entire group into motion. Before I could ask what was happening, a sleek, angular ship descended from above, its engines whisper quiet compared to the roaring beasts I had expected. It landed with precise elegance, barely disturbing the dust around us. I stepped back instinctively, but Blue remained still. She turned to me, her expression calm. "You will come with us now." It wasn't a question. I stared at her, at the soldiers moving around us with silent efficiency, at the ship that had appeared like a specter from the sky. "And if I say no?" Blue blinked, as if the thought had never occurred to her. "Why would you refuse?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Because I have no idea what's happening? Because I don't even know who you are?" I gestured wildly. "One second, you're starving and alone, and the next, you've got an army at your feet. Forgive me if I'm a little lost here." She studied me, her expression unreadable. Then, with deliberate care, she stepped closer. "I am Velari," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "Daughter of the first house, ruler by right, heiress to the throne of stars." She lifted her chin slightly, as if waiting for my reaction. I just stared. "Right," I muttered. "Of course you are." The words should have sounded ridiculous, like something ripped straight from a bad holodrama. But looking at her now, it made sense. The way the soldiers deferred to her, the way they had knelt. I had shared my last chocolate bar with an alien princess. Valerie took another step toward me. "You saved me," she said, not knowing who I was, not expecting anything in return. She exhaled slowly. "That is why you must come." I frowned. That makes no sense. To you, her gaze never wavered. But to my people, you have committed an act of sacred significance. You have changed everything. I didn't like the sound of that. The ship's ramp lowered, the interior glowing with soft golden light. The soldiers were waiting. Valari extended her hand to me. I hesitated, and then, before I even knew why, I took it. The moment my fingers closed around hers, I knew there was no going back. Valari's grip was firm, steady, and as soon as our hands touched, a ripple of motion passed through the gathered soldiers. They shifted, standing even taller, shoulders squaring as if something important had just been decided. I still didn't understand their customs, but I had the distinct feeling that I had just sealed some kind of unspoken pact. The ramp of the ship stretched before me like the open mouth of an uncertain future. I hesitated for only a second before stepping forward, Valari beside me. The soldiers flanked us, their presence a constant reminder that I was now part of something much bigger than a simple rescue. Inside, the ship was nothing like the industrial human freighters I was used to. The walls pulsed with soft, bioluminescent veins of light, casting the interior in a calming golden glow. The air was warm, carrying a faint scent I couldn't place, something rich and earthy like rain-soaked stone. I followed Valari through the corridors, my boots making almost no sound against the smooth flooring. The soldiers walked a step behind, silent and disciplined. I wasn't sure if they were guarding me or escorting me. Valari stopped before a large door that slid open with a whisper. Inside was a chamber unlike anything I had ever seen. A vast window stretched across one side, revealing the planet's darkened surface far below. The furniture, if you could call it that, was organic in shape, smooth and curved, seemingly grown rather than built. The centerpiece of the room was a raised platform, adorned with intricate swirling patterns that glowed faintly. Valari turned to face me. You must understand what has happened. I let out a breath, rubbing the back of my neck. That would be really helpful, yeah. She studied me for a moment, then gestured for me to sit on the platform. When I hesitated, she added, "It is a place of honor. Only those who have shaped the course of our people may sit upon it." That didn't exactly reassure me, but I sat anyway. The material was cool under my fingers, humming faintly, as if it were alive. Valari remained standing. To my people, power is taken. Strength is proven through battle, through strategy, through sacrifice. Her eyes held mine. But you gave freely, without expectation, without force. I shifted uncomfortably. I'd just shared a chocolate bar. A small smile ghosted across her lips. Yes. And by doing so, you have done what no warrior, no ruler, no conqueror has ever done. I swallowed. And what exactly is that? She took a step closer, her voice barely above a whisper. You have earned loyalty, not demanded it. The weight of her words settled over me like a slow-moving storm. I had never sought power, never wanted anything beyond survival. But now, I had the loyalty of warriors who had never knelt before anyone but their own bloodline. Valari dropped to one knee before me, bowing her head. The soldiers followed. And just like that, I realized I wasn't just a stranded survivor anymore. I had become something else entirely.